So nice to be with all of you all over the world. I hope that your lives are flourishing and that we're enhancing them and giving you a new vista of what's possible. Well, the good news is for people like me that have been doing this for a very long time, we were always outside of the fence, as we say. And everything we were talking about from clinical experience, working with so many people in the conquest of disease, and fighting successfully the premature aging process, was being fought against us by the scientific community. Lo and behold, the scientific community ran out of tricks. And finally, they're starting to do lifestyle medicine research. So we are today going to present to you what I consider, out of the hundreds and hundreds of studies that I've been reading over the last few months, the most important that are very significant. These are the ones that represent the trend in science now, where they recognize epigenetics is really what's in place. It's no longer we can blame genetics or we can blame bad thinking or just one aspect. It's so comprehensive today that you're going to be absolutely surprised at how much data there is to support what we are talking about today. And many of the speakers in this conference have been talking about and have had lots of experience in. So the first thing we want to talk about, quite simply, is how you, in fact, see 30 life-changing science-based nutrition and medical discoveries applied in your own life. How you are, frankly, going to be using these on a daily basis in everything that you do. Now, this is pretty scary. This is bad news for those of you out there that are on a quasi-health diet, or even worse than that, on a Western diet. A recent study came out on French fries, one of the most popular foods in the world. And we always thought, oh, French fries will make us fat, and French fries are not good for you because they're fried. They actually tell you it's fried in the name. But today, there's direct links to depression and anxiety. So the following information is bad news for all of you. So you may want to listen and may want to go in the right direction from this point forward. Following information may be alarming. The studies that follow on these slides are intended to help you make informed decisions. You have a lot of information coming at you from the other side. Buy this, do this, sit back, relax. We'll take care of you. After you crash your car, we'll bring you back again. And that's all bad information, misinformation, and frankly, fraudulent. So the first thing we want to talk about is what's been happening since 1921. Now, if you count on your fingers, that's more than 100 years ago. Since 1921, here in this country alone, but then it happened all over the world, the #1 killer is heart attacks and strokes, and also, to some lesser degree, phlebitis. It's actually a heart attack of the leg, where you clogged up the veins there and the capillaries there. Can you imagine that this is really not a disease in all but less than 5% of the cases? Now, to call something a disease, it has to inherently come from a place that we're still a little confused about. We still really don't know about. But in this case, we know exactly where heart attacks and strokes come from. There's 4 major areas. #1, your diet. You expected me to say that, and I came right out of the gate and told you. And when you're eating an animal-based diet and a high-sugar diet that takes your body and produces high amounts of fat, you're going to clog those little capillaries, which, by the way, about 74% of all of the little blood that moves through your system go through these microscopic capillaries, and the rest go through larger veins. They're very easy to clog up with animal fats, saturated fats, and your body producing these fats from consuming high amounts of sugar. #2, it is lack of movement and exercise. Recognize that only 100 years ago, everyone did that. It was mandated if you wanted to survive. Everyone was farming, everyone was working manually, everyone took care of their own yard. And what do we do today? We sit back in our easy chair, as we call it, not so easy anymore, and watch TV. That's our great entertainment. What's really funny to me is we call them sports bars. So very overweight people sitting there and drinking more sugar, called alcohol, and cheer on people exercising. They don't do a bit of exercise themselves, and they call them jocks. I don't know if they're jocks or just lazy. And I think lazy is the answer in that one. So lack of movement and exercise also create heart attacks and strokes. Stress, boy, that's a big one today. You know, our bodies were programmed over evolutionary time to have cortisol come out when we were actually being attacked. So we knew to run. Our muscles would pump up and we'd run and we'd be frightened and we'd be saving our lives. But now for absolutely no reason, this is happening constantly. When you actually sit back and see some experience that you're not even involved in, it may trigger that. And now your body's in a reaction that it's pumping out lots and lots of hormones. Those stress hormones erode the entire system and certainly the cardiovascular system. And the last one is lack of purpose. And that's really important to know. Now, as we sit here and speak, in this country alone, America, 26 million adults have cardiovascular disease, of which only 3, 4, or 5% at maximum is really a valve problem, some kind of a mechanical problem, and the rest is what I've just mentioned above. They are not living a lifestyle that's healthy. Every 38 seconds on average, that's 2 people a minute, somebody dies of a heart attack and stroke. Again, almost none of that is necessary, except a handful of cases, which, by the way, can be corrected by modern medicine. We currently spend about $216 billion, think about that, $1 billion on this so-called disease. It's not a disease, but guess what? In about 12 years from when we're now sitting and speaking, it's going to go up to a whopping $749 billion. That is actually $750 billion. Now, how do you like that? And that's a recent study that came out. Now, I want you to look at this closely because we have different dates. Back at the turn of the century, in the 2000s came, is in the blue, and then the reds are about 10, 13 years ago, and the greens are the future, but not too much into the future. Only about 5 years from when we're sitting here, 4, 5, 6 years from when we're sitting here. Now, what I want you to focus in on is the United States. So this is cardiovascular disease rates in 2000. Now we go up just about 10 years later. Look at how much they rose, and look at what we expect them to rise to in just a handful of years. Look at Brazil. Here we are. Americans always say we're number one. Well, Brazil's going to beat us in this. So Brazil had practically none in 2000, went up substantially in just a decade, and now about a 15, 20-year period later, look at that. We're going to actually run out of space if we do this next time. Look at Germany. Now, Germany's seeming to figure out lifestyle a little bit better than the United States and Brazil. And you see that they had a problem, and it became a little bit bigger problem, but nowhere compared at all to the United States there. And China has the curse that all countries that attain money have. Everyone says, well, America, how bad it is, but they all want to be like Americans. So look at what the Chinese are going to do with cardiovascular disease in just a handful of years. Now let's move over to type 2 diabetes, United States. This is one of the fastest growing disorders in the history of medical science data. And what's more outstanding on this subject is it was a non-existing disease back at the turn of the 20th century. Nobody had what we today call type 2 diabetes because it's lifestyle created. This is, again, not a disease. At least we have a little validity in the fact that somebody may have a valve problem with heart problems. But in this case, this is 100% eating high amounts of animal fats, sugars. That's exactly what type 2 diabetes is. Look where the United States is going to go. We're not slowing, as you see this. We've almost doubled from the last reading in about 2010 to 2030, 20 years later. Brazil, look at Brazil. They're close behind us there. Germany, look at Germany. Let's give Germany a hand over there. They're doing pretty darn well. They're not going to grow. So in a 20-year span, they're really not going to grow in diabetes. China, well, look at China. They beat us in this one. Look at that. They're actually going to have more diabetes than we do in the United States. Now look at obesity, one of the biggest killers. And obesity is a catch basin terminology that really encompasses many, many disorders, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer. But look at the obesity levels in it itself. We were really in big problems here in the United States at the turn of the 21st century. And look at where we're going to be in just a handful of years. Brazil is actually going to beat us on that one. Germany is getting a little heavier, but not standing at the same shoulder that we have been in the past. And China is rapidly moving forward. Scariest part is the next one. We're going to prove to you through clear data, industrialization causes cancer at one of the highest levels. Now, there's many factors to cancer, and we'll talk about that. But this is really industrialization. The United States cancer rate is going to go up, and it's steadily moving up. And the sad news is, in my perspective, after doing this since the early 1970s, is that the younger people among us are the biggest victims of cancer today. It used to be we lived many, many years of poor lifestyle, 50, 60, 70, 80 years before cancer entered our bodies. Now it's 5, 10, 15, 20-year-old kids that have cancer. And there's a reason for that. We were the industrial power. We are the people that created fast food, junk foods, dyes, chemicals, preservatives. And with that said, the results show with cancer rates, especially with our youth, who have grown up their entire life that way. Older members of our society in this country, in North America, actually at least began life without so much of those toxic waste in their lifestyle. Brazil, you see that, they're going to move up there in cancer too. Germany is moving up slightly, but look at China because of the industrialization. So there's a cost to having factories and having chemicals spewed into your air, to your water, and to your food. Take heed. Cancer is a metabolic disease. Now, this is something we've known here since the 1950s, because back then it was almost religious fervor, where every doctor in the world was trained to tell you, and boy, they didn't have any problem saying this to you. Oh, we know why you're sick. We know why you have tumors. We know why you have this particular disease. Whatever the name of the cancer is, it's because you have genes that cause that. But we know that very, 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 very few people have genetic forms of cancer. And if so, it's usually a combination, that small group of genetics plus very bad lifestyle. Now, what metabolic disorders mean is lifestyle choice disorders. And we have so much data on this now, it's just at the point nobody can deny it. And so it's how you think, how you live, that basically opens up the gate and switches on the gene that says, yes, come in, cancer. I'm here and I'm ready to embrace you and to let you go wild in this particular body and spread and metastasize. But you can have many, many choices that will prevent that. This is what we've been doing here and proving scientifically all of these decades, nearly 70 years. And so thank goodness science is growing to the point where they're willing to open up to what really needs to happen today. We have a comprehensive cancer program here with the top doctors from around the world, progressive doctors. And we think no matter what choice you make in your cancer protocol treatments, that this part of it, this segment of it, our comprehensive cancer lifestyle program has to be part of it. Now, this one I really want to labor over. About 43 years ago, we recognized that sugars of all type fed cancer. Within a short time, we recognized it also fed viruses and bacteria and mold and yeast and fungus. But let's go back to the cancer part of this. Now, this wasn't new. We weren't the first people. As a matter of fact, there were scientists more than a century ago discussing this, but very few people took heed. And as a matter of fact, when I would go out back 4 decades ago and speak about this at conferences where physicians were there, they would mock me. Well, here is the latest absolute chart of exactly why sugars of all type feed cancer and make it grow in the body. So let's look at it. I'll go through this very quickly and simply. So you have the glucose. Now, let me mention to you, don't think that this is just table sugar. So this can be honey, this can be maple syrup, this can be agave syrup, this can be date sugar. This can be coconut sugar. Anything that is extracted from a whole food, even if it's from a whole food and condensed, is a sugar. There's really clear evidence in our arena and in other people's arenas in science today that fruit sugar is the most egregious. It's the one that causes the most growth of cancer, but we won't focus in on that today. So when you consume the glucose, it goes down through this cycle, the TCA cycle, as you see. Now that's a normal cycle that everything that you swallow is going to go through. Now I want you to see the offshoots to both the left and the right here. So you see the growth factors on the left up at the very top there and the growth factors on the right. And the citrate actually turns into acetylcholine and moves in, and you end up with RAS, MEK 1-2, and ERK1-2 growth factors on that side. Now, this is a nucleotide process that is happening. Now, this is actually taking the cancer and saying, go ahead, allow yourself to multiply. And that's where we have cancer moving, gravitating from one place to another, migrating from one place to another. On the other side, the growth factors are P13K, AKT, mTOR, and HIF. And over to you see the left side of that, or maybe in your case, the right side, FOX is a glucose uptake. Now, this is exactly what happens. And these growth factors can no longer be overlooked or denied. I mandate, if I were in charge, that every medical doctor in the world has to study this, understand that this is solid, clear science, evidential science that is backed by massive work done globally by the most incredibly effective research scientists on the planet today. So why we've seen such remarkable success here in helping people bring about their own recovery, because we pulled all sugars over 40 years ago out of the diets of people with any form of cancer. Now, I know a lot of the lesser knowledgeable holistic doctors think that there's some cancers that you can eat fruit and others. Abolish that silliness. Learn what you need to learn and study what is now available for you to study. And don't have opinions on what you don't know anything about. I try not to do that in my own life. It's not always easy, but it works most of the time. Now, here's something that we used to think was a sidebar. Oh, yes, well, you need to sleep. No longer is it a sidebar. We actually realize a great way to make yourself sick, and I don't care what sickness you choose to embrace, but all sicknesses will come to you. Hypertension, diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, metabolic syndrome, if you don't sleep well enough. And sadly, when I would be speaking to people when I was a very young man, very rarely did I meet somebody who had a serious sleep problem. And now when I ask that question, as I travel the globe, inevitably it's more than 50%, 60% of people in the audience raise their hand, sometimes hundreds of people in that audience. When I say, how many of you do not sleep well? They raise their hand. The same thing happens right here on the Hippocrates campus. So this means that you're actually setting yourself up by weakening your overall immunity so that diseases just walk right into the body and take foot. And you don't want this to happen. So we spent a lot of time in our energy medicine department here with state-of-the-art technologies that help people reprogram their brains, get the neuron functions to move in the right direction, to relax the overall sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, and they can get into deeper REM sleeps. There's some people after menopause, women, of course, that in fact have sleep problems. That can be remedied too with natural hormonal therapies along with these technologies. So don't let this be something that's chronic in your life. This has become a prominent factor in why people are sick or not sick, why people age prematurely, or they do not age prematurely. Now we're going to talk about food. So we brought this into different sides. How diet can be either the greatest physician or your best nemesis, the one that fights you the best, your biggest enemy, et cetera. And most people have an enemy in food. Now, let me reference this by telling you that we don't recognize that we have addiction to food. And I don't want to talk about substance addiction, the sugars and the fats. I've labored over that often with you. What I want to speak about is the patterns, the sociological patterns, the emotional patterns you have to food. Remember, as a little girl, a little boy, mom and dad taught you that food was love. And so you embraced food as love. So when you weren't feeling quite good about yourself, how you indulged is eat food. And the foods that were always love related were high sugar, high fat foods. And this is why we get into these patterns. We socialize around these foods because everyone had the same type of upbringing. I don't care where you live on the planet Earth. We all had this ideology about food. It is actually something that has to do with emotional kindness. Now, in one of my books many years ago, Life Force, I wrote that what distinguishes the human species from all other creatures on the planet in one unique way is we sit at the table, and the old terminology was we break bread. And somehow we have this pattern when we sit and eat, we talk to one another. If there's not food there, we seem to have a difficult time expressing ourselves. So with all of that, understand what we're going to talk about now is really always not because you are a person who's not bright and doing the wrong thing, or a person who's not knowledgeable. You're a person who has addictive patterns. So here we are with something that's a break from the addictive patterns. We're looking at a period from the beginning of the 21st century, 2000, for 18 years, and the increase in plant-based consumption. Now, I will literally express my feeling on this. The systems around us has failed us. The food system has failed us. And when that fails us, then we go to the healthcare system, which has failed us. Matter of fact, it's become the #3 killer in almost all of the developed world. But look at the increase in plant-based consumption. Now, grant you, a lot of these people are embracing a much better diet than the Western diet, high meat, high sugar diets, but it's a lot of junk food, but at least it's a start. There was one year that it literally went up 2,000% plant-based consumption. And it's not expected to drop because today we have the scientific community globally talking about this, saying for Earth to sustain itself, for we humans to be on this planet, we must all become plant-based eaters. The way we consume animal foods today, it's not sustainable. And there's no question about this. This is not debatable anymore. And what we also have to know is that people are recognizing they've got to take responsibility for their own well-being. Because seemingly, depending upon others hasn't worked out well, has it for you? So this is a great thing. Let's hope you're part of those statistics if you're not currently. And let's hope you don't just move into a non-animal food diet, but a non-animal food healthy diet, whole plant-based and raw as much as possible. The next plateau we all have to move to, and I know that most of us are just struggling in this medical community to get you to just be plant-based eaters, is to get to non-processed. They talk about whole food diets. Well, once you cook them, they're processed. So that's not really a whole food at this point. So we distinguish the difference between a whole food being something that's organic, plant-based, fresh as possible, and uncooked and unprocessed. That's where we have to go. And that's what we've been showing and proving here for 70 years has been most effective on maintaining youth and fighting and preventing disease. Your protein sources really matter. So a lot of people out there today are still under the unfortunate understanding that the dairy and meat industry worked really hard and spent millions and millions of euros and dollars on getting you to believe that the only good sources of protein are these animal-based foods. Well, Australia, which surprises me sometimes, they come up with really great studies. So they did a study on all types of death, mortality as we call it. And they looked at men that were maturing, older men. And what they found is that little incremental increases in animal food increased the death rate substantially. The lowest amount that they looked at by eating like one meal a week of animal-based foods to your diet was 12% higher death. And it went up to 23% higher death. Now think about that. 1-2 meals of meat a week up to 23% higher death rate. Conversely, the total opposite of it, when people increased dramatically their plant-based, so as an example, if you're eating 10 animal-based meals a week, and remember, you have 3 meals a day, you have 7 days in a week, most of you, that's 21 meals. Well, if you had 10 of them that were animal-based foods, you're going to have a death rate up to 23% higher. Let's imagine that you dramatically reduce that by 5. You're only having 5 animal-based meals a week. Now you increase your longevity by 25 to 28%. So if you take the 23% increase in death and the 25% or 28% increase in longevity, there's almost a 40 to 50% gap between people who don't eat meat and do eat meat. Think about that. And we've seen the same exact thing here ourselves on an ongoing basis. Cooking degrades nutrients. So we go back to what I just mentioned a moment ago. I don't know why people are questioning this. I know there's a lot of people that are having the struggle moving on to a pure, uncooked, whole food, plant-based diet. And I get that. And you have a lot of naysayers out there, you know, conventional doctors, even some of the so-called holistic doctors, say, oh, it's too hard for your intestinal tract. Then they go back and they recite biblically Ayurvedic medicine and body types, and they talk about, you know, the reality is that that is antiquated philosophical jargon. Today we have strong evidence that the only fuel that your intestinal tract loves to create healthy bacteria in, which by the way is everything for immunity and psychology, is raw, green in great part, plant-based, cellulose-rich food. Now this one, we're just going to talk about a very common, you call it a vegetable, but it's really not. It's a fruit, tomatoes, or tomatoes, as you say. If you look at the carotenoids and the vitamin C and the provitamin A in this, they're completely shot by the time you cook it. Now, in books I write for the academic community, I have volumes of evidential science on this. As a matter of fact, I could do a 55-hour conference and just give study after study after study on how when you cook something, the proteins are destroyed in great part, the vitamins are literally gone in great part, the minerals are disturbed in great part, and more importantly, the oils, which are inherently in every whole food, become carcinogens and in part contribute to cardiovascular disorders. But more important to us, because our clear science shows us that the 4 elements in food that keeps you young, prevents disease, and by the way, helps you reverse disease, are hormones, completely shot when cooking, oxygen, when you're smelling the food as you cook it, the oxygen molecule is what you're actually inhaling. Phytochemicals, the extraordinary medicines we found in raw plant-based organic foods, and enzymes. We call it HOPE. So you destroy the hormones, oxygen, phytochemicals, and enzymes. Beyond the fact that's not discussed in mainstream nutritional science, it is what we will discuss in the future because it's future science and it's quantum biology. Low nutrient, low caloric foods, health and longevity. Eating foods that are fried, so here we call it the Southern diet, but it's the Southern diet, unfortunately, pervades the entire society worldwide. This is fried food, and we mentioned early on that even fried potatoes are going to give you more depression, more anxiety. But high sugary drinks are directly linked to early death. Now, why do we need studies on this? It's common sense because sadly, most people don't hear it. Most people are eating this way and they will have advocates. So today with the advent of Google and the advent of the internet, you can get on and whatever your idea is and whatever your philosophy is, you'll find somebody that will support that. And then you'll in fact say it's perfectly fine because Dr. X or Dr. Y said it's good for you. The clear science, the evidential science, recent science shows you that's completely nonsense. Kaminsky and German in this particular study were very articulate on the matter. They said this is one of the greatest global catastrophes we have today. Our health conditions, chronic health conditions, even sleep disorders come from this consumption of non-food. It's poison. It's noxious is what it really is. Association between ultra-processed food intake and all-cause mortality, death, and systematic review of a meta-analysis. Now, what is a meta-analysis? I mention this periodically. Those of us who read science on an ongoing basis really don't trust individual scientific studies unless we know the doctors, the scientists, the organizations, or the institutions that have done those studies, and they're reputable and we trust them. They're very, very hard to find today because science is pretty much bankrolled by people with vested interest. When I say pretty much, that's an understatement. Almost in total, bankrolled by people who have an objective when they go in to do the science. So when you have meta studies, they take 20, 30, 50, 100. I've seen meta studies where they looked at 1,000, 1,500 studies. And then somebody who's very, very sharp, data analysis person, statistical data analysis person, sits back and looks at the commonality of everything that was discovered in every one of those studies. So there may be one common or two common or three or maybe 10 common things that every one of those studies came up and concluded was what they discovered. But if you looked at 1,000 studies, they could all have totally different outcomes. So you could look at 1,000 studies and their analysis of what they have just studied could have a different outcome. One could say the sky is blue, one could say the sky is yellow, one could say the sky is red. But when you look at the deep knowledge that is harvested from these studies, this is what they see. So what they found is sugar-sweetened beverages, artificially sweetened beverage, processed meats, et cetera, are really high cause mortality. Now, this doesn't surprise me because even the World Health Organization, who is not always that ethical, but at times do great things, had to jump in a few years ago when they looked at processed meats. In this case, they looked at bacon. And this was even surprising to me, as bad as I know bacon was. They said 2 pieces of bacon a week. Listen to this, 2 pieces of bacon a week. Literally, you'll increase colorectal cancer by 15%. Who eats 2 pieces of bacon? Maybe you eat 5 or 6 or 10 pieces of bacon a day if you're eating it. Substitution of unprocessed and processed red meat with poultry or fish in total and cause specific mortality. When people say, well, I don't eat meat, I eat chicken. Well, let's remind you that chicken is a small meat. I don't eat red meat, I eat fish. Let me remind you that fish is a swimming meat. And all of these increase heart problems, et cetera, with no question, and this study shows it. So you increase heart problems, there's no difference. And in the case of chicken, it was actually relevant enough to say to you that it actually got worse when people consume chicken. And I don't care if it's so-called free range, that is a sales pitch for wealthy white people. The fact is there's no such thing as a healthy chicken for a human being. We're not supposed to be eating chicken or fish or eggs or milk from another species or red meat or pork or wild game. Off the table, don't need it. It's dead. And let's hope to God it's dead in your mind and your soul, and you get over the emotionality of consuming these things. When replacing red meat with poultry, there was a slight decrease in cancer, but not anything to talk about. Plant foods fight cancer. Now, this is something we know because all nutrients come from plants. Now, let's go back and remind everyone who says, oh, well, I get a lot of nutrients from eating, a steak or from eating fish. No, all of those animals contracted and gained their nutrients from plants. In the case of aquatic life, they got it from algae and sea vegetables, as we call them. In the case of a cow or a pig, they got it from land-based plants. So when you have higher amounts of micronutrients in spices and food, like vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, in a healthy lifestyle, numerous investigations, like endless investigations, show that you increase life expectancy and fight cancer. Now, why? Because within the cells of these plants, we successfully fight off the mutagenic factors of cancer. So as the cancer is literally starting to fight, the plant comes in and beats it at that point. Now, here's one I really want you to look at. Last year at The Real Truth, I did an hour-and-a-half program on this. Your inside is you, and we got into detail. But this is the latest data that just came out, and I want you to look at this closely. So up at the top, right and left, so we look at metabolites on one side, lasting glucose, insulin sensitivity, total LDL, low density lipid, and short chain fatty acids on one side. And this all has to do with metabolism, and it all has to do with the brain, behavior and cognitive, motivational cognitive processes, all of these up the side, brain activity for language, empathy, related task, emotional health, and personality traits, all have to do with the quality and amount and strength of healthy bacteria from the gut. Now, I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning once again. Your three families, Prevotella, Bacteroides, and Rhumococcus, are the families of bacteria within the intestinal flora and fauna. Their food is cellulose, raw cellulose. Now, think just for a minute. Once I cook it, think about the difference between a cooked spinach and how limp it is, and a raw spinach. Doesn't even look like the same plant at all. And there's a need for your body to have the water-rich, enzyme-rich, nutrient-rich, phytochemical-rich life green plant in your intestinal tract. Study after study show that people that consume higher amounts of green, organic, plant-based foods have better psychology, better immunology. And right here on the ground, we've been proving that now since the middle of the 20th century. Because when we put people on these organic, raw, plant-based foods, we see their bodies instantaneously respond. Oh, they don't have to be scientifically probed to do it. They don't have to be educated to do it. They've been waiting for your whole life to get the fuel that was meant to be fed to them. And then we see that immune system fight that disorder back. And then once it does that job successfully, it stands guard to protect you from disorders. We see the mind change. This was sort of perplexing to us here for decades. People's attitudes, minds, perspective, vision would dramatically change almost across the board with all of the thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people we've worked with over the decades. And now we realize why. Because this fuel went up to their brain, turned on the serotonin receptor site, and got everything you see up in behavior and cognition in working order once again. So believe me, this is not just about eating healthy to save the planet and to save your body. This is to save your consciousness, to save your life. Now, here's one that's very interesting. I love the work that they did recently on this one. This is Berry and Valdez and on the microbiome. And look at this chart. You have fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and bioactive compounds and how they interact when you consume them. So look at this. We know how they affect, for instance, the heart, how they affect the liver. And if you look at that chart closely, we're getting to the point now where we're drilling down and showing you what plant, what seed, what vegetable, which fruit literally turns on a particular part of your immune system or your psychology to have a particular outcome. So the new pharmacy will be a plant-based living pharmacy that we will literally have an entire science on this. We have to re-educate every physician in the world, which we've started to do, by the way, that we successfully, with our colleagues out of Harvard and out of Yale and out of Loma Linda and all over Europe, created the very first lifestyle medicine graduate degree in Lithuania, which is conducted in English. You can get a master's or doctoral level, and you don't have to be a physician. You just have to have a 4-year scientific undergraduate degree. And this is where we're heading. As a matter of fact, as we speak, the US military, the Air Force to be exact, is working with NATO on lifestyle medicine to put soldiers on it throughout the NATO alliance. And this is where we're heading with this. So this is no longer a group of people talking about eat vegetables. This is really a significant move in the right direction that will take humanity out of the sadness and the disease and the disorder and the unbelievable cost, not only economic cost, but emotional cost that out of control lifestyles have on you as an individual and humanity as a whole. So these functions that we talk about are really amazing. And these are the things that we've been contributing to and working on at least my whole adult life. And since Ann Wigmore founded the Institute in 1956. So now we look at gut microbiota as a mediator. You know what a mediator is. He talks from one part of dietary impact on host metabolism in most diverse in vegans and has been suggested to be a health promoting factor. So now what we know is not only do the plants do what I just talked about in the last slide, but we now know that they actually create greater intelligence, greater communication between one cell and another cell. So why is that? Just like you. If I got you drunk, are you going to have an intelligent conversation with another human being? Or by the way, if I gave you the healthiest diet in the world, exercised you, and got you to do meditative practices for 2 weeks, would that conversation not be much, much more effective and fluid and intelligent? Well, you know what that answer is. And you are reflective of the cells, and the cells are reflective of you. So as we treat our whole being in a healthy way, we treat ourselves and vice versa. So we have extraordinary, wonderful things to share with you today like this. This is a study that was just conducted a couple of years ago. Look at this next one on immune system. We've been talking about immunity our whole life. Why people come here, why people get well, it's the immune system. But now we know how plant foods do this. So look over at this chart again. You look at beta carotene at the top, phenolic acid, zinc, at the bottom, vitamin C. You'll get the production in the middle, formulation, and what do they affect? We now know exactly what immune system cells and mechanisms they switch on in the body to boost the immune system. So look at one side, shows the plant foods, the other side immune boost, and what it is these particular elements within raw plant-based foods. Remind you once again, once you cook it, most of these are gone or completely gone. Once you cook the plant-based food. They produce, they formulate, they move over, and all we have is a formation that gets the neutrophils, which are part of the immune system. It's an amazing army you have. You have the innate immune system, the adaptive immune system. Neutrophils are part of that. Antioxidants, antibodies, which are by the guys that hang out and say, hey, that bad guy's been here before, let's go and attack it. We know what that bacteria is. We know what that virus is. And we have the T cells, which are the generals. I mean, this is like the toughest general in the history. And we want that general to be well-fed, well-rested, well-hydrated, and supported. And when the general is given all of those attributes and support, it reacts in a very, very good way and says to the B cell and other immune system cells, the general and the colonel, let's get going. Let's fight this virus. Let's fight this cancer. Let's fight this mold. Let's fight this fungus. Let's fight this bacteria. And why people are sick is because we don't have the plant-based foods. Now, there's more to this story too than just plant-based food. We're not just mono-sighted here at Hippocrates. We're going to get into that a little bit later. So active aging and pro-longevity effects. Now, I want you to really, really look at this. So on the Western diet versus whole grains, nuts, and they're only being polite, saying reduced red meats. They're doing remarkable data work showing extraordinary improvements. For instance, increase of almost 11 years of lifespan for women by moderating the amount of garbage they eat, not getting rid of it. They may think it's extreme to say get rid of it. Why? If it's actually improving lifespan for women by 11 years, but men by 13 years, Why wouldn't we say, get rid of this stuff? And then we wouldn't have 11 years and 13. We could hypothesize and say it may be 20 years in both cases. And if you start this at 20, this happens. If you start it, when you're older, after you're 60 years old, you're going to get an 8-year increase in lifespan by moderating what you eat, not doing what we're suggesting to do. Throw the garbage out, get rid of the junk, leave behind the addictive patterns, the substance abuse, the sugars, the fats, the things that we're going to, but look at the chart we have here to show. So we have genetics, we have size, we have age, we have sex, we have health status. We bring it down through the longevity diet, which is, again, a raw plant-based diet is the epitome of that. So we have a platinum level as a raw plant-based organic diet. A gold level is a plant-based diet in part that is cooked, but in part that is raw. You have a silver diet that is in great part cooked plant-based food. Then you have a bronze diet that is almost all cooked food and maybe some of the junk food. Then you have a copper diet that may be the new meat substitute diets, high sugar, high smoothie, high carrot juice, high beet juice diets. Now, I'm not here to condemn anyone. Whatever your entry level is, do it. But the fact is, you want to be up here at the platinum level. If I gave you an opportunity, as an example, I brought in a container and said, okay, you have a choice to take any of this metal that you want. You can take a platinum, you can take a gold, you can take a silver, you can take a copper, you can take a bronze. Which one would you choose? Of course, there'd be no question you take the platinum. But are you willing to put the effort in necessary? And look at what happens here. The carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, they go down through the cycle. Regeneration occurs. You get rid of the animal fat, the sugar, the animal proteins, as you saw from that study in Australia, where there was a 40 to 50% difference in people that consumed animal food and high plant food diets. It's just, why not, people? I know it's a struggle. I know it's hard. I know you have all the talking heads speaking to you, but let your heart speak to you. Don't listen to the talking heads. Talking heads have a lot of opinion because they're stuck where they're stuck. Every day I wake up and I attempt never to be stuck where I was stuck yesterday. Now, it's hard. I'm not saying this is an easy thing, and I'm not saying that sometimes you don't get stuck into your own paradigm. But every single day, I'm open to learn. I'm open to grow. I'm open to improve. And when you sit in a position like I'm sitting in, where I counsel thousands of people every single year and speak to hundreds of thousands of people every year, as I am you right now, I better be ready and open to improve and to grow and to bring you the latest information, the latest data, and show you the real hardcore science in this stuff. Others talk about science. They use science almost as a shield. Oh, yes, there's not enough scientific data. I had a debate one time with a really well-intended alternative medical doctor, and I congratulate him. He's doing much better than most mainstream medical doctors. But he was saying, there's not enough data. And my response clearly to him, which it would be today to any people like this, is don't cherry pick your data. I have to read things I'm completely uncomfortable with sometimes, but by the way, if it makes sense, and certainly if it's a meta study that I've seen many, many examples of that being, it will sway my opinion. Not because I'm easy to sway, that's the opposite of true. It's because it's hard for me to sway. And if you can sway me that way, that's what's going to come out of my mouth and what I'm going to guide you to do. In vitro and vivo, these are not in humans, trials of plant-based food against different disease. So look at these different studies that are now done. We're drilling down, people. We're drilling down. It's so remarkable. So look at the vegetable category, the fruit category, the seed category. Look at over the type of disorders. Moving to the middle of that, colorectal cancer. We know that bok choy, for instance, is an example. All forms of cancer. Spinach helps you. Colorectal cancer, and down the list we go. Now we go to the next page. We look at nuts. We look at spices and herbs. Thank goodness now we've been talking about this forever. Spices and herbs are sometimes condensed nutrients, have much, much more than many of the common vegetables of the phytochemicals, the medicines that are in the food. And look at what we have. Even essential oils are talking about with this one for diabetes. Why? Because some organizations are putting a lot of effort and a lot of money behind scientific data to show you that even essential oils change the body's biochemistry and help that what? Immune system to activate. Look at almonds for lead toxemia. This is a new one on me. Little did I know that. So we're constantly learning things. Pumpkin seeds, cancer and arthritis. High zinc content, flaxseed, diabetes. Cognitive and plant-based diets. So this is the mind. You know, we say, oh, people have intelligence, they have IQ. Thank God that's all being thrown to the wayside now. We recognize that people are born sometimes with brain damage. The most obvious forms of brain damage now, as Dr. Seneff from MIT tell us, is that very large spectrum of autism that she speaks about, even dyslexia being in that, ADD, ADHD in that, what used to be called Asperger's disease, fully functional and not so functional autistic children. They're forms that are commonly spoken about and discussed and scientifically studied on brain injury. And there's a second level where you're not coming up with any of the common symptomality that would actually fit into those categorically. So what we're seeing in those cases is people who have been a little slow, as we call it, or their uptake is not as quick as it should be. And we're recognizing now this could be worked with. Brilliant work of Dr. MN. I'm so happy for what he's doing now. Shows you can reverse in great part these problems. Now, we can show you that these problems can be changed by just reducing inflammation, by changing to a proper, healthy dietary lifestyle. Drinking sodas create inflammation. Drinking alcohols do. Drinking coffee does. They, no question, biochemically, in every case studied, create inflammation. And when you inflame the brain, it is not functioning at the rate and the ratio that it ought to be. Now, this should not be hard. So we now have targeted nutrients, as you saw in the last few slides, that we can actually effectively change the way you think and potentially even consciousness. It's wonderful to know about that. So you just don't sit and pray all day long and om all day long. There's other things you can do to wake up, to become a participatory member of the human race. Now, here's an old thing, but a recent study that was done by cats. And when we look at this, this is the human mouth. How we ever came up with the convoluted idea, and I'm going to give you the history of this, that we are carnivores is completely bizarre. Even omnivores, we adapted to eating in that way, a little meat and plants, but the truth is it hasn't worked out, and that's what we've been speaking about, and others in this conference has been speaking about time and time again. So humans are not biologically designed to consume flesh and milk harvested from another species. The accepted but unnatural practice has been scientifically validated as a direct link to a wide variety of disease and premature death. So why would we consume these things? Because some off-the-track, conventionally trained anthropologist, medical doctor, conventionally trained nutritionist. Remember, I was conventionally trained, but boy, thank God I knew a lot that I didn't regurgitate or repeat what they were training me to do. The people who are dietitians who make menus in hospitals and menus on planes, these are conventionally trained people with dietary food habits. So think about this, people. Why would we partake in something we know is not a natural process for humans? Now, if you doubt this, and I know there's a lot of you out there saying you're on an all-meat diet and you're on a primal diet and all of these latest flash cards that we have out there, this is the period of time we're having diversity, and this is bad diversity in this case. I challenge any of you to prove to me you're a carnivore. Now, to prove to me you're a carnivore, you'd have to be a very, very rapid runner, because most animals run and fly quicker than you can move. And then you'd have to run and grab the animal, and your teeth, look at the teeth there, that's a beautiful set of teeth, by the way, would have to go and grab the flesh of the animal. Imagine you had the animal next to you there, which is a carnivore, and you'd have to pull the flesh off and swallow it. Now, can you imagine doing that? Can you imagine having the capacity to do that? Well, I couldn't because it can't be done. And if you believe that you're a carnivore, you would have to have that capacity. Beyond that, by the way, you'd have to have, your fingers would not look the way they are. They're blunt at the end, they're soft at the end. They'd have to have big claws on them, so you could also pull like this. Let me know how that works out for you if you've done that. And take films of it, because I'd like to see your process of doing something so unnatural and doing it because somehow you have a belief system you need it. Your body, shaping how you continue to walk through life. Now, exercise has always been considered important, but usually it comes down in our very mundane awareness globally now to, am I going to be heavy or am I going to have the weight I'd like? Not, what is this going to do for me? Beyond the fact it may help to regulate weight. But very few people really exercise. We know the data is stunning. Less than 5% of the population in the developed world exercise adequately. So that means 95% of people in the developed world, where we have access to exercise equipment, access to gyms, we can walk, we can do many things. 95% of us do not do adequate amounts of exercise. Pretty sad. Physical activity and exercise, consistent physical activity over both 11 and 9-year periods were associated with 38 to 51% lower risk of all-cause mortality. Now think about that. You increase your lifespan by over 1/3 to 1/2 by doing consistent exercise. What would stop you from doing this? One simple word: laziness. Laziness. I know that well. My idea of exercise was lifting a cigarette to my mouth. I had very small biceps. That was about all the exercise I did at one point. So who would not, if you're given an opportunity, choose to live 38% to 51% more just by doing low risk, high benefit exercises? Chronic disease and physical activity. Physical activity and exercise provide a non-invasive means for added chronic disease prevention and treatment. We know that. I watch it right here, right on the front line when people come in. People who have exercised, number one, their disease, when they do contract a disease, is much less. The gravity of the disease is always much less. And when they continue to exercise, they can actually heal themselves of any disorder. I'll repeat it again. When they continue to do aerobic exercise, moderate aerobic exercise, a minimum of 35 minutes, 5 days a week of exercise, they can heal up to 3 times faster. Now think of what I'm saying to you. Why not? Because once you exercise, the stem cells start to come out in great part from your bone marrow, replace the sick and disease cells. The disease cells come out because you're perspiring them. You activate the urinary tract, etc. Your body is perspiring. You have about 2 pounds of waste that comes out of the average body's skin every single day, the largest organ. So of course, and today it's so silly that we have to sit here and scientifically validate how important exercise is, and exercise should be fun. Just 2 nights ago, we bring in a rock band here during the People's Program, and we danced for a couple of hours. And people say, "Wow, that's the most exercise I've done in years," some of them for decades. You can have fun doing this. Find something you love and do it. But make sure you know that you cannot be healthy without exercise. And a lot of you plant-based eaters out here, skinny little ones that talk about how, oh, the food doesn't let you have enough weight. Get out there like I do all of the time and lift weight. Do resistant exercise. Food is not supposed to put weight on your body. Healthy food puts health, nutrition, and substance in your body. Body needs to be grown with muscle. Bone structure needs to be densified by exercise. That's what you should be doing. And everyone in history did it until recently. So if we have to create a formula, which I do, and everyone in their right mind does, exercise is as important as what you eat and what you think. At 10-year follow-up, the number of different types of exercise performed was inversely associated, oppositely, associated with onset of cognitive impairment, as was a number of exercise sessions lasting at least 20 minutes. Now look at this study. Al Bank said this one. He wasn't a big exerciser before this was done, but now he's absolutely bought into this whole thing. If you can actually have a better memory, you have a better insight. Again, we go back to the consciousness level of just doing intervals of 20-minute exercises over a 10-year period sporadically. We're not even talking to do a regime that you should be doing. Just sporadic 25 times, 6 times, 10 times a week, 20 minutes doing some form of exercise, weightlifting, aerobic exercise, stretching, yoga, Pilates, whatever, walking, swimming, one of my favorites, surfing, dancing, all of these things, you actually have, after a 10-year period, a dramatic improvement in the way your brain works. Again, oxygen. When the cells are moving, more oxygen come up. The nervous system that goes from the gut, the healthy bacteria in the gut, because you're eating a plant-based diet that's organic and raw and green, actually moves much quicker up the nervous system, the spine, into the brain, and turning on that serotonin receptor site, exercising the serotonin receptor site. Please, you couch potatoes, listen closely. It's not easy. When I first began to exercise back in the 1970s, it was a killer for me because I had never done it in my life before. So make this part of your lifestyle. Plant-based nanoparticles, the future of medicine. Now, our biggest concern over recent decades have been nanomedicines. Now, there's a great advantage to nanomedicines. We're going to be able to target diseases, but they've been using synthetic particulate to do it. We finally got to the point where they've done amazing studies where this team of doctors just recently showed us that you can take plant and take them to microscopic levels, attach whatever we want to attach to it, and have it go through the blood-brain barrier and target it, the liver, the heart, the gallbladder, the spinal cord, whatever it may be. This is a remarkable move forward in the medical community, and I applaud them. But plant-derived nanomaterials used for treatments of disease and cancer. Now, when we do this in a way where we don't process and destroy the micronutrients, the elements in it, you're going to have a double whammy. You're going to be able to take those nutrients, and for instance, if it's in the heart, and we know that particular nutrients like zinc, like different elements, vitamin C, vitamin A, affect the heart. We can target the heart with plant-based nanoparticles. Congratulations, and boy, we're on the frontier of really getting this right. And I hope all of you are there to support it by living a lifestyle that is commendable and one that you represent the future of mankind. Your mind, to me, the most important. So we leave this towards the end, but this is the most important. If the mind's good, the life is good. Creating the best environment in your mind and with people from the community. Another thing nobody talked about until recently. So happy to see some of my colleagues in the research community discussing this. Isolation and mortality. This is the Royal Society of Medicine. It's a big deal over there. Now look at loneliness and look at all the different areas there and social isolation. Now, why this is increasingly more important is our youth today are inherently socially isolated. That once we got into the digital electronic age, community went by. And what happened is that our whole life focus is now on a screen. The average Western child is looking at a screen between 6.5 and 7.5 hours a day. There's very little communication with other human beings. Now, we say, well, why does that matter? Because there's an energy exchange when you're with the person, not only hormonal exchange, but a literal energy exchange that you're picking up something from one another. This interaction enhances the overall body and mind. And what we recognize now is that there's major death that's associated with isolation. You're going to see that it happens to young people actually more than it does to older people. So people who have been really lonely and isolated throughout their entire life, say you were a recluse as a teenager, you never made friends easily, you don't have a partner, you don't have a support system around you, can die actually on an average up to 15 years sooner than the rest of the population. I'll repeat that. So being lonely or sitting in front of a screen 6 to 7 hours a day, even if you have an international community on your social network, doesn't do it. You're not interacting with human beings as we have from the dawn of time. That chemical exchange is what we're talking about at this point. The support is what we're talking about at this point. The older you get, you're still going to die sooner, but not quite as much, because prolonged agony and isolation results in even greater death rates. Biological outcomes of mindfulness. Now, this is something my generation, the baby boom generation, talked about back in the 60s, and it was really funny. Dr. Benson out of Harvard was mocking us in a way, and he said, well, you know, this meditation and this Eastern stuff that you're talking about really doesn't work. And he did a deep dive into it and became one of the greatest scientific advocates for it and was one of the pioneers in it. He talked about the respiration response, so breathing rhythmically and inner focusing and getting rid of the noise. Well, now we know for sure that Benson and people before him, and certainly people thousands and thousands of years ago, who came up with the concept of prayer, contemplation, and meditation were right, because it improves the T cells. Again, go back to those generals, the killer cells, the big aggressors that come out and beat up the cancers and the viruses and the bacteria. And all studies increase telomeres. Now, telomeres are one of the common ways that we measure longevity. One of the many tests that we do when people arrive here is biological versus chronological lives. And this is what we can tell. So to make this overly simple, if you have short telomeres at the end of your chromosome, that means you're aging prematurely, or if you're older, you're aging naturally. If you have longer telomeres, and let's imagine you're old, you may be 80 years old, but by the way, have telomeres that look like the average 30-year-old person. Or conversely, it could be a 30-year-old person that looks like an 80-year-old person. It's so interesting. We have a young guy here right now on the campus, severely overweight, and he basically is 34 years old and biologically 60 years old. And as sure as I'm sitting here, if we looked at his telomeres, we actually would see that they were short. They were like an 80-year-old person, 70-year-old, 60-year-old person. Mindfulness. Now think of this. We're not talking about chemistry anymore. We're not talking about food. We're not talking about exercise. We're talking about explicitly and clearly mindfulness, quieting the mind, focusing the mind, increases the size and shape of the telomere and activate the T cell, the general, go out and fight the bad guys and the killer cells. Isn't that fantastic? So how important is it for you to spend 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes a day on your own quiet, walking, contemplating, meditating, praying? All of it achieves the same thing. Very important. Your mood. A recent large cross-sectional study showed a higher occurrence of depressive symptoms for vegetarian dieters compared to non-vegetarians. Why? Dairy food. So this one is a sampling where dairy food is the greatest problematic. There was a study done at the King's College in London a number of years ago that showed the same thing. Higher levels of depression with the higher level of milk and dairy consumption with it. Conversely, again, they looked at women. 80% of women on a vegan diet had less mood disturbances. So all we did is get rid of, yes, the vegetarians are eating more plants generally, not always, but generally then. Well, they're all plants, but they may be processed plants is what I should say. But the fact is, when you become a vegan, we're not even talking about a raw vegan, which again, go back to what I keep repeating. The 3 families need raw green cellulose. There was an 80% of those women had a better mood, less depression, happier people. Who doesn't want to be happier? And all it has to do, in this case, is to be a vegan. Psychological intervention protocol based on psychoneuroimmunology. Now, this goes back to the 1970s, 1980s, where they finally recognized, hey, there's an interconnectivity between the brain and the nervous system and the immune system. Now we know it. Now, finally, after 60 years of people questioning that, there is plethoras, tsunamis of data showing it. In this study, we found patients subject to PNI, again, psychoneuroimmunology interventions, a close correlation between the severe key immune markers, that means things that get the immune system going, and more evolutionary various clinical aspects of the symptomology. So a lot of jargon there to say that symptoms went away once we did psychoneuroimmunology. Immune system activated, we could actually measure that. There's ways we do that with these very sophisticated immune testing today. And this is something we've been doing this on the campus here since 1980s. 1887 to be exact is when we brought psychoneuroimmunology in, and we've watched the results it has. Many times our guests walk into the room a little out of touch, a little confused, a little sad because maybe they have a diagnosis, or many people come here today who are perfectly healthy, who want to stay young, who want to stay vital, who want to maintain the youthfulness and vigor that they had. And when they walk into that room a little out of touch, they walk out totally in touch with themselves. Because when you actually are able to help them connect the brain with the nervous system that enhances the immune system, the healing commences at that point. In a study of 7,000 people over a 10-year period, results indicate the stronger purpose, purposeful lives. I just did a lecture about that here 2 days ago. Was associated with the decreased death rate, mortality. Purposeful living has health benefits. So one of the things I constantly haunt the participants here at Hippocrates and in my books, my 31 books, is find your purpose. If you don't have a purpose, the next logical question is, why are you here? The next logical question is, why should you be here? You know, are you here to breathe air because you think you have privilege, that there's some reason that you're special? Well, the answer is you may be special, but the truth is you're not using your specialty. And your specialty is to find what you're on this earth for, what your contribution is. And when you find that, all at once you manifest this existence that's remarkable. You almost feel infallible, that there's nothing you can't do once you realize you can do what you love. And this purposefulness, I have a formula. P plus P equals success. Personal passion, purposefulness equals success. And so think about that as much as you would what you ingest, how you exercise, how you focus and do mindfulness practices. All of this makes a difference. And I'm here to say that there's lots of aspects in the puzzles, may have different pieces of the puzzle, but all of those pieces are just as important. You could have a puzzle with 10,000 little pieces in it. If one piece is missing, life is not complete. So thank you for listening. Now we'll answer any questions on what we spoke about today.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that very informative presentation, as always. So, all right, so now we're going to begin our Q&A session. And for the audience sake, I just want to go over a few things. We do not take questions directly from chat. What we do is we ask that everybody raise their hands in Zoom. In order to do that, if you're not familiar with it, the second button from the right is the reactions button. You're going to click on that, and then you'll select raise hands. And then I'll call on you. When I do, just state where you're from and ask your question. And we just ask that questions are brief and on topic. And with that, I will get started. So let's go ahead and call on Tomer. Where are you from and what's your question? Tomer Jackman. Maybe I'm not saying that right.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm from Massachusetts. My question is about how would you go about helping a 16-year-old who's been diagnosed with Crohn's?
Well, quite simply, if you go to conventional thinkers, and unfortunately, many of the doctors who now purport they're natural doctors, they're going to tell you the worst thing to do is raw food. And that's why they're going to tell you it's a chronic disorder that never, ever gets well. And we see the total opposite of that. Now, of course, that little child can't walk into Hippocrates or into your home or to a salad bar and eat the way that you or I may. But there's ways to blend, process, and utilize particular foods that are going to be mucilaginous and help to coat their intestinal tracts and make it a comfortable process. Now, why this works, and we've seen it work in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases, is because you actually have something like a cave that is so filled with mold and death and dying and lack of life, it's stagnant, is that you've got to bring light in it and you have to bring life into it. So by eating bland things, as they suggest, or even worse than that, animal-based foods, what you're literally doing is perpetuating that. You're actually feeding the death and dying scenario. When you start to bring this in, slowly but surely, the tissue mass, the cells of the large intestine, and to some degree, the small intestine, start to now trust. You're giving them oxygen, you're giving them enzymes, you're giving them hormones, phytochemicals, you're giving them vitamins, you're giving them proteins, you're giving them minerals, and they start to respond. Just like when you get a wound and the body heals itself, picture somebody with colitis or Crohn's disease, diverticulosis, diverticulitis, and to some degree, irritable bowel syndrome, being a wound within your intestine. So again, it has to be done thoughtfully, intelligently, and by people like us who are well experienced with this. And there are things that I would really immediately tell you to start, if you can get this young one to do it. Out of all the different herbal medicines and natural medicines, even allopathic medicines I've seen, the most effective is the juice of fenugreek sprouts. There's a mucilaginous gel that is unbelievable. There's medicinal properties in there. Actually, the pharmaceuticals are actually using these for steroidal drugs now, anti-inflammatory drugs. And you can grow these things for pennies. A gallon jar would most likely cost you 30 cents now to grow. And what you basically do is you put it into a slow turning, masticating juicer, not a fast one. And it's this sappy stuff. It's going to be like sap comes in. And to me, it doesn't taste bad, but to a child it may. You may want to put stevia in or something and have them drink that at least 2-3 ounces 4 times a day. Second thing is raw aloe. Yeah, you can buy a lot of aloe at the health store. It's as dead as a doorknob. Might as well leave it at the store because it does no good to you. So you need to get either the raw aloe leaf, which I personally do. I don't have any of these problems. Yes, it's great for your health. Aloe makes any nutrient that you're consuming absorb up to a 20 times higher rate into your cell. It actually saturates and hydrates all of the organ systems of the body and cells of the body. So you could take the raw aloe, cut the top off with a very good knife, with a butter knife, take it out and push the gel down, but you won't want to put it in a blender that long. The most you want it is 8-9 seconds in the blender so you don't oxidize it and kill it. That's why blending foods are not really healthy foods. They're just better than sodas and milk and milkshakes. So you then take that and have them drink that too. That's going to coat the intestinal tract. Now, again, things like sprouts are dynamically nutritious, highest protein foods in the world, highest medicine foods in the world. Even juicing those at first would be it. But you don't want to put in seeds because they have little pockets of infections, inverse or exverse. And they basically, you don't want to get the seeds in there, they can inflame it. You don't want to have heavy things like nuts. Now you can take nuts, we do it here, but you have to make them into a powder, you have to soak them, ferment it a little bit, and they eat in a burger or loaf. But I would avoid that at this point. What I would do at this point is heavily on the green vegetable diet, low on sugary fruits or sugar diets, high on the kind of things I'm speaking about, and then supplement with food so we know that we're getting wide cross sections of nutrients that they're lacking. Because once again, if your gut's not working, your immune system is not working, not maybe, it's definitely not working, and your mind's not working. That's why depression is so high with our youth today, because their guts do not work. And it was chronically that kids in their late teens and early 20s got Crohn's and colitis. Today, we're seeing kids in here at 5 and 6 years old with this. And we're also seeing people on the other end of the scale at 30, 35 are getting this. So it's a big problem. It's not just in your family. And I send you love and support.
Great. Thank you for that, Brian. So as you're well aware, so many of our speakers say that oil and fat hurts the endothelial cells. Is there science either way that is clear on if oil hurts or helps our health? And what about nuts, seeds, and avocados as healthy fats?
But number one, there's a little truth on both sides. So I think that people get to be extremists. They're almost like terrorists for their belief system. I'm not a terrorist. I'm a moderate when it comes to this stuff. I think that if you overdo anything, if you overdo water, you could end up sick from it. Put a fire hose in your mouth, turn it on, you're in trouble. So yes, I agree with overconsumption of oil, but I also totally look at the science. They always talk about following the science. Well, I happen to follow the science, just newer science than they're following. There was a study done over in Europe where they took people in Spain completely off all oils. They felt it was so inhumane, they stopped in the middle of the study. They're having neurological difficulties, cognitive problems. I mean, and these are young people. We're not talking about aged people who already had these disorders. So we do have that evidential science, and it's clear today. What I lean to believe is that small amounts of oil over a lifetime, hopefully in the food itself. So you just mentioned some. Avocado, an amazingly good oil. And it has glutathione in there too. Well, why not take both of the benefit? Properly sprouted nuts, sprouted seeds. When you sprout them, it breaks it down from complex proteins to amino acids, from complex carbohydrates to simple sugars, and fats to essential fatty acids. So it literally takes away the work process, the job process. The body has to break it down. And so making it much more adherent to the cell and much less likely to clog up the epithelial that they speak about all of the time. And I have a lot of respect for what they're talking about. But on the other hand, I think that people need to really, as I do, get up every day and challenge my own belief system. And so when you challenge your own belief system, you realize you may not have been quite as right as you were before on something. And, you know, beyond following the science, let's also talk. There's a lot of these people with a disadvantage. They don't do what we do. I'm sitting every day with people coming in here from all over the world and watching the sickest and smartest people in the world. So super healthy people come here and super sick people come here. And when we put them onto a lifestyle, which organic plant-based foods and great part green, we get their head together. We talked about mindfulness. We get them to move and exercise. We watch the results clinically. We're not guessing this. We're not reading somebody else's materials or research and regurgitating it. For instance, today when I'm quoting studies, it's just confirming what I personally have experienced and learned over 53 years of working with 300,000 people. That's literally what I'm doing today. And I'm not saying that some of those people don't have some depth of experience, but I think very few would have that level of depth of experience or deal with the type of people that we are. And so oil is not the devil. The lack of oil is a devil when you get older. I can tell you that.
And what do you think? I don't know if you're familiar with Udo Erasmus. He did
very much so.
Okay, so he did a panel with Anna Maria the other evening. Just for the audience, he's the author of Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill, and he's a big advocate of oil. He's 81 years old, phenomenal shape, great cognition. Yes. And, he has like 2 to 4 tablespoons a day of oil, but a very specific oil. And what he says is that oils are, almost all the oils that are out there are damaged in the process. And that's really so much of the danger of oil. And he has an oil that he's created a process that supposedly alleviates that damage. What do you think about the veracity of his claim that all these oils, it's really hard to get an oil that isn't extremely damaged by the process of extracting the oil from the plant that it came from?
Well, he's absolutely correct on this. Back when I began with healthy lifestyles, late 60s, early 70s, this was a big conversation about rancidity of oil and cooking of oil. And somehow it went to the wayside. And now there's this big debate, should we eat oil or shouldn't we have oil? And so in the process of extracting oil from plants and seeds, most of the time it's heated. And once it's heated above 115, 120 degrees, it becomes a carcinogen. Not because we think so, we know so. Since when? 1952. I was a little tiny guy in 1952. And so that's a done deal. We know that. And rancidity, I mean, you extract an oil, and most oils are very volatile. And you look at walnut oil, amazingly good for you when it's fresh. But if you sit it for 4 months out on your counter, basically it becomes rancid. So it's bad for you. So that's factual. It's not his opinion. That's factual. I also want to give him an accolade because before Udo Rasmussen filled up a van with oils and went around to little health stores all over North America and talked about essential fatty acids, none of us spoke much, if at all, about it. Frankly, he was one of the many people that taught me the significance of oleic acids. And so he's a hero for people who understand, and the science community, by the way, of the importance of oils. Lastly, I'll say that he makes Udo oil. It's very popular in Europe. When I'm in Europe, by the way, when I talk about essential oils, they say Udo oil. That's how popular it is. Here, not as popular. He's a European, as you know. He grew up in Canada, or lived most of the time in Canada. And I think he's a down-to-earth, sensible guy. And he has a lot of proof. People are going to criticize him and say he's not a medical doctor, he's not a scientist. But look, after you've had 40, 50 years of experience working with thousands, tens of thousands, 20,000, 50,000 people, I don't know how many, with him, you actually see the results. He himself healed himself. So some of the people that I've found to be the most authentic, most dynamic, and most effective in their field are people who have self-healed. Because he was really a sick character until he found oils. And that one thing alone put the key in the door of his recovery.
So just a quick follow-up on that. So other than Udo oil, how do we find oil that isn't damaged in the process of making the oil itself?
But you have to find companies that are really ethical, number one. You may notice recently, you've seen in a lot of the press, that most olive oils are not olive oil. That's factual. And by the way, the trees in Italy are all dying. Because they've been not growing them organically. So the soil is getting so depleted because of the heat going up with greenhouse gases. We're having a problem finding oil. So they're mixing a little olive oil at best with a lot of junk oil. So walnut oil from a reputable company, I don't want to name companies, but there's some out there. Foods Alive that's helping to sponsor this. They make great seeds. That's a great way to get oil in that one. Walnut oils from California. Almond oils from California, avocado oil, all organic. Remember, these are heavily sprayed crops. They're not organic, but buy small amounts and refrigerate it. Now, there's no debate on that. If you don't refrigerate it, it's going to perish much quicker than it would be if you stop that from bacteria counts going down. And so you'll probably get 2 up to 3 times greater lifespan out of the oil by doing that. Now, remember, if you're going to eat it 6 o'clock at night, take it out at 5 o'clock. What's really interesting is the monounsaturated olive oil, which I actually like the flavor of olive oil, like the flavor of walnut too, actually gets hard at 32 degrees. Really interesting. So that's how you know it's a monounsaturated, 32 degrees. If you take it out, it goes to 30 degrees harder, 40 degrees, it gets soft. So that's what I suggest in small amounts of oil. Not large amounts of oil. And I'd prefer, as anyone would tell you sensibly, to get it in a sprout or get it in a seed or a nut.
Excellent. All right. Our next question is coming from Deborah. Where are you from and what is your question?
Hi, it's Debbie from Duxbury, Massachusetts.
Ah,
and
yes.
I have actually 2 questions, but I don't know if I can ask them. One, what you spoke in the beginning a lot about cancer and preventing cancer and or treating cancer and the sugar from fruit and all that. What I wanted to ask was, if you are healthy and you don't have cancer, but of course you're always aspiring not to ever get cancer, do you ever let fruit in the diet?
Good question.
And then,
Excellent question.
Hold on, but I have one more before they mute me. and you just kind of said like how about the oils, and I'm not going to name a company. I struggle to find food products that meet all the criteria, even with using Thrive Market, organic, all that kind of stuff. Is there any push in your group and group of people here to, get either, I don't know if it's regulation or get that we can have things that are healthy for us without so much effort? Because I just heard on one of the lectures, like most chickpeas have cadmium or something in them. And that's like a big staple in at least my diet. And I'm running against this barrier into many, many, many different foods, and even going to these markets. And then all of a sudden I look it up and I realize that it's not the product that I thought it was. And it's like a job. So the sugar and the products, those were my questions today. Thank you.
Well, Debbie from Duxbury, I know it well because, as you know, the Institute's from Boston. We were there till 1987, till I moved it down here to Palm Beach, Florida. And so we know it well, and you're making an incredibly valid point that organic became hip and popular. As a matter of fact, on the supplements that we create, I no longer put organic, I put clean, because to me, it's been prostituted to such a level. And when you start to recognize that they are marketing foods more than making sure the quality is good, it's a concern. Now, the same answer I pretty much gave about the oils. There are reputable long-term companies, like Jaffe is one long-term company, as an example, from California. They've been around before I was a health guy. They've been there, this is second or third generation. So you can trust what they're doing. You can also buy seeds. Remember, when you really are serious about your health, taking in your home, even in the middle of January when it's snowing in Massachusetts, seeds, nuts, grains, and beans, and growing them in your kitchen window, you have total control over it. And there are companies that look at quality of seeds, sprouting organic seeds. You can look them up on the internet. Again, we have those available here, but there are other companies around the world that have those available. So you wouldn't want to, if you're in Europe listening to me, or Asia, you wouldn't want to get seeds from North America. You want to get seeds from your part of the world. The other thing is, recognize that vegetables that were picked a week or 2 or 3 weeks earlier in California that are organic are certainly the choice you should make, but also remember that they're not going to have very much nutrition in it. But a sprout that's growing at the time that you actually pick it up and eat it is going to always have massive amounts of nutrition in it. And in the case of sprouts, on an average of 8 times more nutrients. So that means 8 times more vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin D, right down vitamin E, down the list. And that's why you want to take control. So you have to simplify your life, not look for replacements of what you used to eat, because then you start to get into the processing, and just go for the high quality. Everything we do here is at the platinum level. And grant you that it's not always accessible to all of the people in the population, but you have to create your own platinum standards and values. And once you do that, this becomes a simplified process that is easy. Once you create the clothing, you know how to put the clothing on. Every day you'll just do this systematically and routinely. And the second thing you asked about was fruit. And the fruit is a problem in certain areas. Number one is the average fruit today has 28 to 32 times more sugar than the original fruit. Now, how did that happen? Hybridization over millennia. Now, this is not, again, an opinion. It's a factual statement. Agricultural scientists will show you that. So can your body absorb 30 times more sugar than it was meant to from fruit, which, by the way, was a wonderful food for our ancestry? I think fruit was a big part of their diet. No question in my mind about that. But it's been messed with. Number two, the ripeness of fruit is unbelievably problematic. They do not and will not pick fruit ripe. They can't. So if I picked an orange in Florida that was ripe, and they don't ripen here, by the way, until about April, they start picking them in September, and ship it to you in Massachusetts in the middle of winter, and it takes a week to get there. When you open up that box, you'll have rotten oranges. So they pick it a month, 2 months, 3, 4 months early. They tell you it ripens off the tree. That's not true. Like taking a baby out of a mother at the 4th month, not the 9th month. You'd have to put the baby in an incubator for them to survive. Well, your body becomes an incubator for the unripened fruit. So it actually takes minerals out of your teeth, out of your bones. That's why people with arthritic conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, can feel it almost instantaneously. People with gastrointestinal problems can feel it. That unripened fruit, organic or not, is problematic. The only fruit that ripens, I'm not suggesting you eat a lot of this, I don't eat any fruit, is banana. Banana in the skin naturally has enough enzymes to ripen it after you take it from the mother plant. But no other fruit, when you pick it a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months early, in the case of oranges, up to 5, 6 months early, think of that. All they are is high acidity levels. Now, the next thing I can say to you is that when we were still in Boston, the good news is we had a lot of scientists and doctors quietly come to us who were absolutely mystified by what we were doing. Some of them were doctors or people who had family members who were told they were going to die. They'd come through the Hippocrates program. They'd bring about their own recovery. There's no magic in this. This is hard work, lifestyle shifts, changes, attitudinal shifts, etc. And they'd come over and say, my aunt got well, or my brother got well, or my mother got well. How does this work? And we couldn't give them a solid scientific answer. We weren't scientists. We were basically practicing lifestyle medicine at that point. So a lot of them would get the keys to the labs, and I'd go over and help in some cases at some of the big institutions. And I won't name any since you're in Boston, but the big institutions. And we found out that when you're as healthy as can be, that means you don't have any viruses or bacteria or mold or yeast or low blood sugar, hypoglycemia or high blood sugar, diabetes or cancers, you can eat up to 15% of your diet by weight, not by imagination, but by weight, as ripe organic fruit. Now, in Massachusetts, in June, you can start picking ripe wild blueberries, excellent fruit. But do you have cancers or viruses or mold or yeast or fungus or low blood sugar or high blood sugar? If so, you don't eat any fruit. Why does Brian Clement choose not to eat fruit? So it also has a secondary problem. It has an aging component to it. So it actually speeds up the aging process. Now, it's almost, I said two things in the same conversation. So let me clarify. I think the original diet of man, when fruit was much different than it is today, was in great part fruit. I don't think so, I know so. Let me put it that way. And anthropologists who basically are serious guys and gals today would agree with that. And greens were part of it too, but it was mostly fruit. Number two, fruit today is hybrid with massive sugar. Fruit today is all picked on, ripened, and these are problems for you.
Great. Thank you for that, Brian. And going along with fruit, and I'm sure I probably asked this question and you get this question a lot. Why do so many of the other speakers insist that there's no data or studies showing that they're showing problems with fruit? They claim the studies show it's healthy and the fructose is different than its surround than other kinds of sugars that we try to avoid. Why do they get this wrong? Why, you just explained why you say it's dangerous, but why do they say there are no studies?
Well, I think that people get comfortable in their own belief systems. I always caution myself in this too, and I always challenge myself. The reason being is that we can get it wrong. Anyone can get it wrong. But when I've been challenging this particular subject for the last 43 years, 42, 43 years, I haven't found a way that it's right. And if you looked at that chart, you may want to go back again and look at that chart I put out on sugar and absorption through the citric acid cycle and how it metabolizes and has growth factors. We only focus on cancer, but believe me, it has growth factors for viruses and molds and fungus too. And that's why people never get well with candida on a high fruit diet. I don't know how they can deny that when that's clear today. And to me, the most interesting character in the entire world of cancer research is also a colleague who's been on The Real Truth About Health, Thomas Seyfried, who actually will show you better than I can, because he's a research scientist, why fruit sugar is even worse than white sugar. And I agree with that because I understand it. And unlike everyone else, including Thomas Seyfried, when I took fruit out of the diet, and we have sick people here, I watch the healing commence. So people who were getting well or mostly getting well or not getting well, we now saw overnight, within a 2 to 3 month period, a radical shift to the improvement of that one. So we've clinically looked at this for over 40 years. Now, doesn't mean I have to make people wrong, just where they are at this point in their own growth cycle. You know, you're going to come back and ask me, Brian, way back during the Real Truth About Health, you said this, and 5 years from now, you're saying this. Well, let's hope so. Let's hope I learned something in 5 years. Otherwise, you should say, I'm not going to listen to this guy again.
Great. And on the topic of fruit, what about red peppers? Does that include red peppers? You know, can we eat, 8 red peppers a day and have no downside? And then also want to ask you about sweet cherry tomatoes. I want to ask you about bee pollen. And is there any limit to eating these foods, even though they contain sugar?
Well, there's no food, including lettuce, that doesn't have glucose in it. So let's start with that. Mm-hmm. So when we differentiate it for the public out there as sweet fruits and low sweet or non-sweet fruits. And you just mentioned 2 of them. Red peppers, we have out here raw organic red peppers, because there's no such thing as a green sweet pepper. A green sweet pepper is just an unripened red or yellow or orange or pink pepper. And so that's why they're half the price, because they take very little time to grow, because they're not really growing to fruition. So that's a wonderful one, because it provides vitamin C and vitamin E and vitamin A at incredibly high levels. Like broccoli includes vitamin A in it, like higher than most other things, and more than carrots. People don't know that. Tomatoes I'm a major fan of when they're ripe and they're organic, and the sweet little ones are good, but they should never be put on, it's a fruit, on a salad. But when it becomes the tomato season here in Florida, which is the midwinter in Florida, every morning when we do put the fruit out, which is only 2 times a week here for our guests, we have ripe organic tomatoes there. And my favorite you're mentioning, we grow some here in our farm on the property, is these sweet little cherry tomatoes. Now, why they're good is there's complete scientific evidence on helping the heart, helping prostate cancer, helping breast cancer. So why wouldn't we be taking those, although they do have sugar? Now, if I had cancer, they'd probably be one of the first things I reintroduce. Wild blackberries, wild raspberries, if you can get ripe grapefruit, these are very low sugar. But again, it may take 2 to 3 years when you've actually scientifically or medical reports show you no longer have the cancer for me to say, okay, now you can eat up to 15% of your diet by weight as ripe organic fruit. You mentioned one other thing.
I mentioned bee pollen.
Yeah, bee pollen I'm a big fan of. Now, the moral vegans are going to yell and scream at me, because moral vegans would never take bee pollen. And I'll be very candid with you. They do abuse the bees. You saw how they collected the bee pollen. Poor bee's doing its job, trying to give the queen the bee, just like, that's what I always do to Anna Maria, my wife. I always give her everything I can. And when they're trying to squeeze in to give the queen bee the gift, the bee pollen drops. So it's not a great thing. So flower pollen would be the choice for moral vegans. Now, I guess I have to call myself an immoral vegan or a cheap vegan, because I do take the bee pollen as often as I can. When I'm in Europe, for instance, the flower pollen's about the same cost, and it's actually a little bit better, but not nutritionally. It's almost equal nutritionally. Now, there's 4 pages. If you look this up, there's 4 pages of nutrients, some of which I have to look up because I don't even know what they are. That's in bee pollen or flower pollen. Somehow the photonic energy that comes from the sun is captured on green leaves, but equally, if not even more so, on the pollen of a flower. There's something magic about it. And I haven't quite figured it out yet, nor when I've talked to botanical experts, have they articulated it in a way I can process it, I can understand it. But there's something really special about it. Not only are they high proteins, they have essential fats in it, cognitive impairment is actually reduced with it, energy levels go up with it, but they have every single vitamin that I've ever known about, every amino acid that I've ever known about, and the right oleic acids that are in it too.
And why do you choose bee pollen over flower pollen?
Cost.
Okay.
Frankly, one is significantly higher in America than the other.
And
let me-
nutritionally, though, are they equal?
equally about the same, but 3 or 4% difference, but nothing to talk about. Let me also say that the pollens that are most appropriate for you, if possible, is local pollen. Now, if I lived in the metropolitan New York area or Los Angeles, I may not be as excited about taking those. And if you're going to use something other than that, high desert pollens, that means pollens from cacti and other flowers that grow in arid regions and high deserts, are the most nutritious generally, but otherwise local pollens are great. And I've actually seen many doctors, homeopathic doctors, I wouldn't know how to do this, able to help people reverse allergies from taking different pollens, local pollens.
Great, thank you. Our next question is coming from Mark. Where are you from, Mark? And what is your question for Brian?
Hi, this is Mark from Newberry Park, California. I have 2 questions, please. One regarding the sleep that you mentioned, the importance of sleep. I have challenges with the sleep to get a good sleep. I started to take melatonin 5 milligram before night, and this has helped me get a sleep, but still I many times wake up very early after 4 hours, 5 hours with the challenges to get a sleep again. So the question is, does melatonin is good for health? Is it okay to take on a daily basis? And is there any other things that can help, especially when you wake up in the middle of the night and have challenges to get sleep? And my second question is regarding, you mentioned the importance of raw food. There is lots of beans that you cannot eat raw, like black beans. What are your thoughts about this? Thank you so much.
Well, that's the last one. When you germinate something, there's nothing you can't eat. So a dried bean or a dried nut sometimes very difficult, even for people with spectacular digestion and elimination canals to process. But when you sprout them, it goes to a whole different level where they become between 17 and 57 times more digestible. Sleep is a big problem, as I pointed out. 50-60% of every audience I've talked to for decades have a sleep problem. Sleeping deep and REM sleep, on challenge sleep. And when you have a child, this is a fairly common thing. I have 4 children. Thank God they're all grown and out of the house. And at times I have my grandchildren there. I have 8 of them. Well, I get to see what mom and dad go through. I don't know how we live through it, to be honest with you. But it's worth it, because at the end of the day, that's why we're here on the planet, to have kids and to love the kids and support them. Now, with that said, melatonin's wonderful. But something is better than that, L-tryptophan. And L-tryptophan is an amino acid, a protein that allows the human body to actually create your own melatonin. And so you may want to take the melatonin, de-escalate it, take more and more of the L-tryptophan. There's no harmful level of this. You can't hurt yourself with it. And literally see if your body produces it naturally, which is much better than imposing melatonin on the body. You may have a very small, you do have a very small uptake when you put supplemental melatonin in. When you allow the body to create it, naturally, the body probably works with 80 to 90% of it and works it and uses it that way. Secondly, when people have deep sleep deprivation problems here, one of the many technologies we use in our energy medicine department, this is a fairly new one, it's only been 2 or 3 years we've employed it, is called brain tap. This has been miraculous. People who have not been sleeping for decades are reporting that they're sleeping now. Now, I'm not going to say it's unanimous, but I mean significantly high amounts of people, that this has been the trick that got them to sleep. And the doctor who put that together, his undergraduate work was in electronics. And he took that level of genius and brought it over to mapping the brain and figured out 10 things that stimulate or sensitize brain activity and massage, for lack of a better word to say, massage the neuron functions, the highways of sleep deprivation back into order again. So if you're in California, imagine Highway 5, where everyone kept going off in the wrong direction. But what it does now is it takes all of those and brings it back onto Highway 5, and everyone is driving exactly at 60 miles an hour, 100 feet apart, and everything moves, and there's no traffic jams. You're getting into a traffic jam in the brain. And so this liberates it and relaxes you. And of course, what I said earlier, mindfulness, but a guy who's probably working with a child at home and not sleeping, you're going to say to me, well, I don't have time to do this, but you do have time to spend 10 minutes once, twice a day with Brain Tap, which you can hook up now very inexpensively and easily.
Thank you for that. All right, we've got about 3 minutes left. I'm going to take another question from the audience. Tel, where are you from? What's your question?
Hi. Yes, I'm Tal, and I'm from the Philippines. So my question is, I have a client, and he's 65 years old. She just had an ultrasound, and it shows that she has multiple liver mass and ovarian cyst. So I really wanted to help her. So yeah.
Okay, so a liver mass would almost always mean cancer of some type, although if we're very fortunate, it could be, odd cases, it could be cystic or fibroid cystic. Now, the concern we would have, or any thinking person would have, is they're going to want to biopsy her. And biopsies are no longer necessary because new technologies came out of Silicon Valley. Our medical team utilizes here, called Galleria. And Galleria is a blood test that's more accurate, as the FDA says, than biopsies, which have the potentiality to spread. Now, certainly the liver is a great epicenter to spread things, since it's the organ of the body that filters the blood thousands and thousands of times a day. So what that means is blood cells come through there so often that if you start to spill cancer cells, they can be distributed widely throughout the entire body. So you may want to look up the Galleria test unless she's already had a biopsy. Now, when it comes to liver cancer, mainstream allopathic doctors are going to panic because the data on this is very, very grim. They've had little to no success with liver cancer. If she's very conventional, in the Philippines, you've got to seek out doctors that at least are looking at immunotherapy. Most of the good work is not being done here in this country. It's being done in Europe, Germany to be specific. And immunotherapy at least won't bomb the body with nuclear bombs that destroy the very immune system that bring about recovery. On the campus right now, we have a gentleman who came with his liver functioning at 8% 11 years ago. University of Pennsylvania, one of our great institutions here, basically said he would not survive without taking the liver out and transplanting a new liver in. He didn't do any of the above, has been on the diet, and is completely healthy and well now 11 years later. So that's achievable. But again, you're in the Philippines, you're going to have a lot of choices. This is not you, it's somebody else. You want to help them. And I'm just giving you the landscape of what you can expect and anticipate. So Galleria test is much more accurate for everyone listening worldwide than a biopsy, which has the potential to spread the disease, certainly in the liver, prostate and breast, even more than other organs. Number two, there are natural methodologies that take a big commitment. This is not for everyone. It takes a lifestyle commitment, passion to live. Remember, purposeful lives. We talk about purposeful lives. If you have a passion, you have a purpose, you want to be fulfilled, you'll succeed. If not, if you just think you deserve to live, you're not going to live. And then lastly, you have to understand that you can help, you can assist, you may love and support. I've seen this with my own family members who inevitably died because they were unwilling to take responsibility. But there's a lot that can be done, and we've seen it here on our campus for 7 decades straight.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. That was another amazing presentation, and I really appreciate the answers to all those questions. If we can unmute the audience, please.
So the answer is yes, you can switch it. May, but also put the old one back in. It did work.